How central is dignity? Now that's an interesting question. When a society prioritizes dignity over any other metric, you see something very profound about that society, meaning a society can have its external trappings, but if dignity and respect and the desire for connection is at the root, there's something very special that's worth investigating. Welcome. I'm Simi Lerner, and this is the Judaism from Within podcast. We're going through Rav Hirsch's Chorev now. It's something we have taken a bit of a break from, but now I'm sort of jumping back into it. We're talking about the idea of loans. Now, once again, for those of you who are joining us recently, Chorev is his magnum opus, his Tami HaMitzvahs, his book that he gives us the descriptions and the reasons for the commandments. And he splits the commandments into 6 categories, each one illustrating a different facet of our relationship with God and our mission in this world. We're on the category of mitzvah, which is love, acts of love, symbolically embodied in action in the world, the ideas that you are supposed to live out in the world that perpetuate love to your fellow. Why do you do these? Not because they have a demand on you, but because God expects it of you, and you, as a child of the Almighty, you live that out in your relationship with God to another person. These are acts of love. Now, let's break this down. We're going to discuss the idea of loans. When you lend someone money, when you help out your friend, a loan is helping someone out. And an important point to emphasize, lending someone money on some level is more important than giving charity. Because once again, this dynamic that we will see play itself out repeatedly, the dignity and the value of the individual needs to be emphasized. And when you lend someone money, they are a partner. They're not something to be pitied. They become a subject, not an object. When you give charity, obviously you should give charity. But there is something lacking in that relationship because you're giving to them who need. But if you lend them money, you become a partner. You become someone who is invested in their growth. So let's open up. We're going to first talk about the idea of the nature of property itself, the nature of property itself from a Jewish standpoint. We're then going to develop it down another direction. We're going to talk about when you come across someone you know who is struggling, an animal needs to be unloaded, and what this teaches us about how we approach people and how we connect to people. And then lastly, we're going to talk about lending and the nature of interest. So let's open up. Do you own your stuff? This is where you sort of get that sort of philosophical foundation that on top of it things are built. Do you own your stuff? Now, on some level, people like to say, no, everything is not yours, it's all God's. Right. And Rav Hirsch emphasizes that over here. But it's worth pointing out, when he discusses in Pirkei Avot the different approaches to people's money and property, there's a phrase that said that a person who says is what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, or what's mine is yours and yours is mine, all these different combinations, and they're criticized and they're encouraged. And Rav Hirsch points out the danger of the approach of what is mine is yours and what's yours is mine. This sort of utopian communistic vision of the world when nobody has any property. No, everyone has property. People have property and people have ownership. Why? Because without that, you would have no love. You would have no giving because you didn't have anything. So obviously you have to have things. Loving kindness is predicated on having things. Otherwise, there's no possibility of love. There's no possibility of giving. So that's worth pointing out as a caveat. But what Rav Hirsch points out is that your actual money is, and I think the best phrase to give is it's vested in you. A vestment is a clothing. When something is vested in you, it's yours. But it isn't part of you. It's sort of an adornment. That is the sort of relationship we should have with money. It is yours, but it's yours with a purpose. It's yours with an expectation. It's yours. You don't have to give it, but it's yours with an expectation. It's vested in you, like a stewardship. And I've forgotten the fancy word where you take control or own responsibility over someone's money. But that's the sort of thing we're working with here. And the reason why that's so important is that when you start acting towards another person with that as your principle, you act to them in a really unique way. Let's sort of begin. I mean, this obviously comes about when we discuss lending and not taking ribis. That's where this comes to its full fruition. But beforehand, we go through the commandments that when a person is struggling to load his animal, you have to go and help the person. You're obligated to help and not take money for it. Once again, that idea of the nature of ownership and your stuff is playing itself out. But Rav Hirsch points out a really important point, which I hadn't really thought about before. You're once again expected to walk with them for a certain amount of time. You're not supposed to help someone out and move on. You're supposed to help someone out and then sort of invest yourself in them. You walk with them. It changes the relationship from transactional, I did a good deed for you, now let me go on with my life, is that I have to walk with you now. It's once again the principles or the concepts of love, which you could say, oh, I believe these, but now you have to enact them. And it takes a step further when it comes to your enemy. There's an obligation to help unload an animal before you help to load up an animal. But when it comes to someone you already have a reason to distance yourself from, you're obligated to help them first. You're obligated to extend yourself to them first, your enemy. Now, this is really interesting because you have an enemy, you have someone you don't like. Now, obviously, if they don't help you and they are lazy, then they have to pay you for your work. But if you're working together, and this is why that's so key, when often I heard the idea that if they're lazy, they have to pay you, once again, it comes along as transactional. I have to do this mitzvah, so if they're not helping me, then obviously they have to pay me for it. But it's more than that. What does it mean if they're not being lazy? It means they're helping you. In which case, what do you have here? You're laboring with someone you dislike. That draws you together. Your shared humanity, your shared work. The sort of irrelevant angle to this is most people's friends are their friends from work. There's a reason for that. People think, oh, my only social life is work. That's okay. Your work is where you connect to people on a very deep level. You connect to them in flourishing, in producing. There's something very deep about that, and that's not something to be shirked aside. And in this case, you have the act of labor connecting people who are distant. So, we have the first principle of the foundation of property and ownership. We have the next idea about how you're supposed to use your time and engage with other people's property when they are in need. And then lastly, we have the idea of lending. When you lend someone money, what does that do? Now, a person's going to say, on the one hand, you give them money, which means you're taking advantage of their vulnerability. Microeconomics, it's my money, I've got a opportunity cost, inflation, etc., etc. But that's not how a Jew is supposed to look at the idea of lending money. The word interest in Hebrew relates to the word a bite. You're not supposed to take a bite out of the other person. Why a bite? Because the language of the Torah refers to the person as your brother. This doesn't apply to someone who's not Jewish, because that's economics. But here, you're taking advantage of someone in your family. You're taking advantage of their vulnerability. That's not okay. If you're in business with them and you both have an investment together, that's fine. But if you are lending them money, you shouldn't benefit from that. You shouldn't take a bite out of their vulnerability. And more than that, the Torah inverts the emotional weight of this relationship. What is the classical relationship? I lent money to you, and now you avoid me because you're scared, or you're embarrassed, or whatever it may be. From the Torah standpoint, it's the other way around. The lender has to avoid the borrower. It's sort of taking upon himself the emotional burden of the relationship. That's an act of love. An act of love is where I care about your vulnerability to the extent where I see you in that state, and I don't want you to know that. That's care. That is teaching you love, not as a principle to be read in a book, but to be lived out in your relationship with other people. But it goes full circle. It goes full circle back to the first principle that your money is vested in you for a reason. It's vested in you for a purpose, and you live out the purpose when you engage in the world and you engage with your family. So that's the idea of lending, of borrowing, of helping people out, being next to people in need, and how the intricacies of walking them, who you're to help first, who you're to labor with, how you relate to your own property, and how you relate to the vulnerability of others, come into play into understanding this commandment under the category of mitzvah. As always, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week and a wonderful upcoming Shabbos.